Welcome to the Roundup by News of the Week, the show where I, Jake Whitwell, summarise and explain the news from the week to help you stay informed. This is the first episode of January of 2025. In this episode we cover some huge news. It's absolutely stacked. I mean, from New Year's Eve messages to assisted dying to social care and then Reform UK as well. There is loads to talk about. So let's get into it. Times detailed Keir Starmer got himself into a fresh spat with Elon Musk after he said after his latest attack on Labour. Musk said that companies should stay away from the UK and that it won't get very much investment. He said very few companies will be willing to invest in the UK as it is currently with the current administration. A spokesperson for the PM said that the Labour government are unashamedly business-minded and pro-business. They said that they've brought in £63 billion worth of investment and they've brought political stability to what was an uncertain time for a few years for businesses. But then on the flip side of it, they've also raised national insurance, employers' national insurance, which has been labelled as a jobs tax by some business owners. Also, their employees' rights stuff, the workers' rights thing, some of that was criticised by people in industries like hospitality, where it was rolled out too quickly. So in some areas maybe they're not as pro-business, and that's up for discussion. All of this though is indicative of just how bad of a time Keir Starmer is still having in Downing Street. Getting into online spats with people that own social media companies and rocket companies and car companies, it's not a good look. The Times also noted that Kevin Badenoch has been attributed to driving 6,000 new members per day to Reform UK. Farage's party has enjoyed a surge in memberships recently, and at one point they claimed to be ahead of the Tory party. After that claim, Kevin Badenoch hit back saying it was fake and that it wasn't true, using populist messages to try and aggravate people and get the message out. It's not real representation. So Farage said that Badenoch's accusations have actually been a real driver for support. The total amount now is 152,000, I think, and then if you break that down over a certain amount of days, 6,000 a day. He also said it's led to an acceleration in the membership. So, maybe there is an element of Kemi's doing there, but obviously there's other stuff as well, like Labour or like just the popularity of Farage. So maybe just a little bit of a headline by the Times, but there is some substance to it as well. Following this, I picked out an article from the Telegraph. It showed just how well Reform were doing. It said 6 cabinet ministers would lose their jobs if there was a general election tomorrow. There's not going to be, but if there was. These 6 include Angela Rayner and Yvette Cooper, so the Home Secretary, PM and the Home Secretary. They are some big cabinet positions that would be losing out if there was a general election tomorrow. Labour would only occupy 93 seats. That's less than a third of the 650 that is totally in the Commons. It's terrible, considering that right now they are on course to a massive majority and they already needed half. To fall to a third would be catastrophic. The Tories only would get 87 seats, so still less than Labour. And Reform would have 67, which shows a massive rise from them from the 5 they've got. In terms of vote share, this would look like 25% of the vote going to Labour, 26% going to the Conservatives, and around 21% going to Reform, with obviously the rest being made by other parties. These findings are from a poll by More in Common, a political think tank which specialises in this sort of thing. We've covered them before in the Roundup, and it was surveyed by 11,000 people, which is obviously a minuscule proportion of the vote compared to the tens of millions that do vote at general election. But it's it does say something about the sentiment of the country right at this second, or rather on Tuesday or when I picked up the story. So yeah, The Guardian reported 30 Labour MPs who originally backed the assisted dying bill now have withdrawn their support or are expected to withdraw their support. I was actually surprised to see this headline because I remember when it all... when the bill was firstly going through Parliament in its first reading, it was well received as political practice because there was no whips, so people could vote freely and they could then debate freely, and you got some actual good legislation. I remember it was dubbed the best of politics at the time, not in any theatrical sense, just because it was good politics, good scrutiny of the policy. So I was surprised that we might now be seeing that devolve into more partisan politics, but actually I was wrong, Upon reading the article and reading around it, basically what's happened is they're not trying to sink the bill, they're just trying to suggest changes to the bill, mostly around coercion, and that a doctor shouldn't be able to suggest assisted dying to a patient. So it's not too far removed from the good that happened last time. It's not like that bill's going anywhere, it's just to try and get changes into the legislation. And the Telegraph also reported that private school fees are set to rise by more than Labour predicted. And you might say, well, Labour set the tax, so how have they got this wrong? Why would they set it lower than they thought? I'll say, well, yeah, they have set the tax, which is now at 20%, but for some reason, and I'm genuinely baffled as to why they've predicted it lower, possibly for some sort of like, hey, it's not actually going to be that bad sort of reason, like they can say to the media and the public. But for whatever reason, they've predicted that 20% tax to only result in around 10% to be put on to parents, and so fees will only rise by around 10%. Well, hasn't worked out like that, funnily enough. Analysis of the 964 private schools in England and Wales have concluded that on average 14% was the actual figure that fees raised by, a fifth raising taxes the full 20%. So there is more money being put onto the parents, and some might say they can afford it, but it's being put onto those parents by the private schools, and it's a higher proportion than what Labour thought. Like I say, I have no clue why they would not predict the 20%, or maybe just slightly less than 20% to be put onto parents, but it's baffling. The Independent reported Trump suggested Canada could become, and wait for it, they could become the 51st American state. I was following on from the last story, I was sort of thinking, what the hell is going on here? Is this actual news? It's kind of actual news. Basically, Trump has circulated articles that sort of entertained the idea on his platform Truth Social, and then Fox News got a hold of that, and in a conversation with Trump's former press secretary Kayleigh McEnany, a Canadian businessman, Kevin O'Leary, enthusiastically supported the idea. So that's where this story's come from. It's not any real substance at the moment, I should say, but there's no real sustenance to it. Wait and see. It should not. Probably business as usual there. The Guardian noted that turnout inequality in the UK is close to a tipping point, according to a report. Now, back to real news, that's kind of more credible. We've got a report by the Institute for Policy Research, or IPPR, and they found that the gap in turnout between people that own homes and people that are graduates from university compared to those who rent or are not university graduates is widening in disparity to such a point where it could threaten the legitimacy of an election result. And this comes as turnout more generally is falling, apart from in 2019 when we saw a little bit of a rise. But turnout in general is falling, and that just shows a disillusionment to it. Now, helpfully, and as these reports do generate most of the time, there have been recommendations to come out of the report, and those are that the voting age should be lowered to 16 to increase turnout, that there should be automatic voter legislation, or voter registration, which would mean that as soon as you turn 18, or when you become a citizen, or whatever, you're automatically registered to vote. Another measure could be introducing a £100,000 annual gap on political party donations, so there's not like that over-domineering sort of message coming from, and that would also coincidentally stop the Reform UK donation from Elon Musk. If that's still going ahead, you'll find out later. Keep watching. What else? The fourth measure recommended was that there'd be an election day service, which would work similar to a jury service in that people would be sort of called up to count results. So it's not volunteers, and that should make them more involved. That's the hope. Never heard of that idea before, but that's an interesting one. So there's the 4 recommendations. The Independent covered Starmer's New Year's Eve address, which celebrated a year of change, according to him. The PM pledged to have to put more cash in your pocket and increase the stability of your jobs. It's come under scrutiny because, well, so far, some people have argued that he hasn't been doing that. I mean, we've already discussed some of the pro-business things and how jobs may be less secure now because of the Employers' National Insurance rise and some of the workers' rights reforms, although that also has a counter-argument that they're supposed to make jobs more secure, but that's regardless. It's come under scrutiny irrespective of that. Or there's a bit of a back and forth over whether that is true, so you be the judge. Right, The Guardian detailed that the Tories' focus on immigration at the general election stoked the riots, or had a part in stoking the riots. according to the chair of the Equalities Committee. Now, this was suggested by people at the time, and so much so that I put it in an article I wrote on the riots. I included a whole section about the Conservative rhetoric and their sort of stop the votes message that maybe inflamed tensions a little bit. Now, the chair, Labour MP Sarah Owen, has said that the Conservatives' relentless focus on small boats and their delays in processing asylum contributed to the severity of the riots. She admitted that multiple factors were behind the riots, but she admitted she couldn't see past that she felt the backlog was deliberate and it was a political thing. Now, as part of her role in the committee, she wants to sort of improve and strengthen community relations and strengthen that social cohesion. Fine, great. Now, we know social media has fueled the riots, with X being particularly cited as the reason for that. And we know that rhetoric might have been an issue, as I said above, that was said just before. But the claim that backlogs being political and then that they attribute to the riots themselves is a little bit troubling, because that's her partisan line to it. For me personally, I thought that was troubling. I just wanted to make that is a partisan thing clear. There are multiple reasons for why those riots happened, and I'm not taking a partisan approach here. There are just multiple, and it's for you to judge what one or combination of those reasons you think had the most effect. Don't go off what I say or what Sarah Owen says as a Labour MP. Right. The Telegraph noted Labour has blocked an inquiry into a grooming gang, which was aiming to look into Starmer's conduct as the head of the CPS. Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, refused to launch an inquiry into historical sexual abuse by gangs or grooming gangs in Oldham. Her reasoning is that the local council there should decide if that's necessary. The grooming gangs were a massive scandal. They're becoming a bit of a scandal now, but they were a massive issue, a systemic issue in different areas of the country where little young girls were being groomed. And there are claims from victims, victim families and experts and things that justice has not been properly delivered, because there were issues at the time of things not being looked into properly by agencies, and a lot of them have admitted letting the little girls down now. Starmer himself admitted to that more recently. Now, Badenoch took this up and she said that it's time for justice to be delivered. She then kind of fired for not doing anything, or for the Tories not doing anything while they were in power, but 9 members of the gang at the time were arrested and convicted, and 33 others around the country were also convicted. So some justice has been taken, but like I said, multiple agencies have been considered to have failed those young women, and Starmer himself admitted that. Some of the questions that still haven't been answered have been centred around whether the ethnicity of the defendants, the alleged rapists, affected whether or not there was a prosecution. Now, Starmer admitted this was probably a problem, and primarily what the inquiry would look into, but it would also look into Starmer, and it has been blocked. Elon Musk took this up and then said that Jess Phillips should be in prison for protecting Starmer, who was protecting Elon Musk, protecting these gangs. It's all a little bit complicated, and I don't think we've seen the last of it yet. But for now, the important bit is Jess Phillips has sent that back to a local council judgment. Sky News noted Nigel Farage has rejected Tommy Robinson again after he received support from Elon Musk. Farage said he never wanted Tommy Robinson in UKIP, and that he won't join Reform UK now because he's not what the party needs. Farage calls Musk a hero and said that his support was helpful generally, but that he disagreed with him on the instance of Tommy Robinson, who Elon Musk has supported, like in his comments on X in recent days. He said something like "Free Robinson." Following this, The Independent then noted that Elon Musk has said Reform UK needs a new leader, and that Farage doesn't have what it takes to lead. Well, Farage then said this was a surprise, and given how close the pair seem to have been, or are, or were, or whatever that current relationship is, that is surprising, especially since meetings over investment went well, and there was a lot of talk of that, and there was a lot of talk about how there has been a lot of talk in the UK media about how that relationship might affect British politics. Well, it might not, also because it seems to be maybe breaking down there. That's not a good sign for Farage. Farage called it a surprise and said that he disagrees with Musk, like I said, believes that he still has what it takes to lead the country, or lead and Reform UK. But Musk instead praised Rupert Lowe, one of Reform's other MPs. So, Times detailed long-term social care reform is not going to come, or is unlikely to come, before 2020. And after promising to deal with social care in their manifesto, Labour has been scrutinised for kicking the can down the road after commissioning another report into the state of social care and the changes needed. Labour have said this report is to get parties on side, but like I said, there's already been multiple reports, so there is a lot of criticism coming from experts and people in the sector and families dealing with the social care crisis, that it's not good enough and that they should have made good on their promise or their pledge in their manifesto to fix social care. Now, what this report will actually do is it will set out two different sets of targets and two different sets of recommendations. One is a medium-term one, and that will, both of them will be conducted by crossbench peer Baroness Casey, and she will conduct the first part of the review to be delivered in mid-2026. To begin in April. It will then deliver in mid-2026. Then the second one, the long-term phase, will come in mid-2028. So the government has also, as part of that, they've announced they will be scrapping the 86,000 cap on care costs, which is also being scrutinised by people for putting them in an even more desperate situation. It's actually been dubbed as a tragedy by that specific policies like creator Sir Andrew Dilnot, and a lot of the criticism have come from experts involved. It is a really, really contentious thing there, and also politically, Labour have just failed an election pledge. That doesn't look good. That will never ever look good for the British electorate. So we'll see what happens there. That's all the news I got this week. I hope you've enjoyed the episode and you found it useful. Thank you for listening, watching, or supporting anyway. If you could leave a comment on anything you think I could need to do better. Apart from changing scenery, I know I keep swapping about. It's just wherever suits when I sit down to record. If you could leave a like and subscribe, that would mean the world to me. It makes this a lot easier to do every single week. Thank you. See you next week. Bye.